warm welcome to this video. I'm Joost Beaumont, I'm the head of bank research of ABN AMRO, and I'm also the chairman of the Data and Statistics Working Group of the European Covered Bond Council. In this video I will present to you the results of the 2023 Covered Bond Statistics exercise that we conducted. And of course a big thanks to everybody involved in this huge exercise. We have good news, and that is that the covered bond market continued to grow for the 6th year in a row, and actually the growth rate was the strongest since 2008. At the end of 2023, no less than 3.3 trillion of covered bonds were outstanding across the globe, and this of course confirms the very important role that covered bonds play as a bank funding tool. A split between covered bond type shows that mortgage covered bonds are largely accountable for the increase. They increased by almost 250 billion to almost 3 trillion, and public sector covered bonds actually saw a slight decline in the outstanding amount at the end of 2023. Then when we look in the breakdown between public sector and privately placed covered bonds, we see that the largest chunk of covered bonds is placed with investors, and we saw an increase there of around 110 billion. But in contrast to what we saw in previous years, also the amount of retained covered bonds actually increased by almost 100 billion. However, this was largely due to one French bank that issued an enormous amount of retained covered bonds in 2023. And that also brings me to the geographical split of outstanding amounts of covered bonds, because also big news is that France took the lead in the league tables and is now the country with most outstanding covered bonds, outstanding with an amount of 468 billion, and that is just a little bit more than the 465 billion from Denmark, which took the #1 spot in the previous 7 years. Another interesting result is that the global footprint of covered bonds continued to increase in 2023. At the end of that year, more than 10% of issuers were coming from outside Europe, and in total there were 329 issuers coming from 34 countries. Still, of course, Europe accounts for the majority of issuers, which have 88% in the total number. Then extendable maturities have been topping the agenda in recent years as more and more countries have embraced covered bonds with extendable maturities since the implementation of the covered bond directive. Well, this is clearly visible in the numbers, as the amount of outstanding covered bonds with a soft bullet structure increased by almost 250 billion, and soft bullet covered bonds have now a share of 66% in the total, and we saw the share of hard bullet covered bonds and conditional pass-through covered bonds decline slightly. We now turn to the issuance data, where we have some good news as well. In 2023, almost 690 billion of covered bonds were issued, and that was the highest amount except for 2011 and 2012. And this in turn shows that banks need to rely more and more on wholesale funding now that they have to repay large amounts of cheap central bank loans, and it also showed that covered bonds are a crisis-proof product, with covered bonds allowing issuers to continue to raise funding following the market turmoil after the mini banking crisis in March 2023, and also after the increase in geopolitical tensions later in the year. The issuance data also show that mortgage covered bonds account for almost 95% of total issues, so clearly in the lead, with public sector covered bonds having a much smaller share. And looking at the country breakdown will not come as a surprise, but also France and Denmark leading issuance in 2023. But nice to mention is that the UK and Austria entered the top 10 in this respect, with issuers also being quite active in the primary market. Finally, the breakdown by maturity type shows that 80% of cover bonds that were issued had a soft bullet structure, so that adds to the evidence already told earlier that soft bullets have become really the dominant structure in the cover bond world. Finally, I want to pay attention to the outstanding amount of sustainable cover bonds, which are social and green covered bonds. And here the big news is that for the first time the total amount outstanding breached the 100 billion mark, as we saw 34 billion of issuance of sustainable cover bonds in 2023. The growth rate was more than 37%, but if you look as a share in the total amount of outstanding cover bonds, it remains a bit of a niche with a share of 3%. Then looking at the countries that issue most sustainable cover bonds, we have to look at Germany, Norway and France, but overall there are now 17 countries where issuers issue sustainable cover bonds, and we have a number of 77 issuers active in this territory. So that is a growing number, and of course with the energy transition becoming increasingly important and cover bonds being a funding tool that fits the energy transition well, we are likely to see this number to continue to grow in coming years. And that actually also brings me to a little bit of the sneak preview for the 2024 exercise, and I'm quite hopeful here as well, because we've seen so far a lot of cover bond issuance already in 2024, with net supply being firmly positive, and that of course bodes pretty well for next year's exercise. But foremost, thanks for watching.